All right. I think we are ready to get started. Everyone has joined. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ana Hocevar. I am a data scientist and an instructor at the Data Incubator. We are a fellowship, scholarship, and placement company. And for today, I would like to start with just a couple sort of housekeeping items to ensure that you all have a smooth learning experience. This session will last for 1 hour, including Q&A. You are all muted. There's too many of you to ask questions by speaking. So make sure that you do submit your questions in the Q&A box. The chat box should not be used for questions. It will instead be used for any general announcements and things like that that we will share. So make sure to put your questions in the Q&A box. If you have any questions outside of this session, please feel free to email us at admissions@thedataincubator.com. This is also recorded, so it will be sent out to all registered attendees. You should receive the recording about 27 hours after we conclude this session. So before we jump in, just a couple of words to introduce myself. My background and my PhD is from physics. From there, I did some interdisciplinary postdoc research, and then I moved into data science. And at the Data Incubator, I teach everything from our basic Python courses to sort of these most advanced machine learning and advanced data science tools courses that we offer. Before we dive into today's demo and all things ChatGPT, I would like to give you a very quick sort of couple of minutes overview of our programs, specifically one of our programs, the Fellowship Bootcamp. So for our upcoming cohort, we will be offering 2 data-focused programs. One is our successful data science bootcamp, and the other is our data engineering program. The data science program will be both in part-time and in the full-time option, and the data engineering one with the full-time option. All of our programs are very intense. They're very hands-on. We're using real-world data. It's packed with a lot of information and a lot of tools that you will learn. They are also thorough. Each week sort of focuses on a different data tool and approach. And in addition to the lectures, the students work on hands-on practice. So in each module of the program, students sort of work on what we call mini projects that focus on the data tools we're studying that particular week. Every student in all of our programs is provided a Jupyter server for the duration of the course. So basically students can follow along in lecture and also use that Jupyter Hub for their projects, where they also receive immediate feedback on the project that they work on via our interactive automated grader. Additionally, our programs are collaborative. We believe in fostering an interactive learning environment. We want students not only to work with their colleagues and instructors, but also to have the opportunity to network and connect with our hiring partners. And lastly, our programs are very career-focused. We have career coaches that help students succeed in data-focused careers. We offer weekly career search workshops, the opportunity to work with our resume writers so that the students get a polished resume and a great cover letter. If you're curious about the program kind of and how it works, the full-time data science and data engineering programs last for 8 weeks with classes held every day, and you should expect to spend about 40 hours per week on all of the assignments. In the part-time program that lasts for 20 weeks, classes are held twice a week from 7 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern. You can expect to spend about 10 hours per week working on things outside of class. There's also office hours every week, and even in the part-time program, you also receive the same excellent curriculum the same training as full-time program, but at a different pace. The sessions are live, instructor-led, so you get all the interactivity and you get to ask all of your questions. And the last thing, in terms of schedule, you can see a little bit about the curriculum right here. This is the full-time program example broken down week by week. If you have more additional information, if you have more additional questions, we have the information. Please email us at admissions@thedataincubator.com for more detailed curriculum overview if you're interested. With that, let's get to the good stuff. I imagine many of you are here today to hear about ChatGPT and how to use it programmatically in Python. So you should all have seen a link to the GitHub repo that contains the code that we will be using today. There is a notebook here that I will be using. There's also a link to a binder link to that right here that should also have been shared with you. If you click on this link, Binder will spin up the notebook for you. In case it comes up with an error, do refresh the page until it comes up. Be a little bit patient. Binder is sometimes finicky. Unfortunately, that's out of our hands. All right, but I will head over to this notebook on my computer and we can get started. So as you probably know, ChatGPT is a very powerful AI large language model that was developed by OpenAI, an AI company and research lab. It is a tool that has sort of many possible applications, and there's many tasks that can be used with it or to solve with ChatGPT. So here's a couple of examples. It can answer questions that you may ask it. It can translate between various human languages. It can generate text. For example, you have some product fact sheet. You want to get a marketing copy. Perhaps you want it to compose your emails for you, or you want it to write code for you. It can do things like sentiment analysis. Imagine you have a bunch of customer reviews and you'd like to process them and understand what your customers are saying, and much more. This is actually text that was generated by ChatGPT when I asked it to tell me what it is and what it can do. Let's head over first to the web version of ChatGPT. The link is right here, so I'll go right there. If you have never used it before, you will need to make an account here. I already have it, so it will open up the chat that I can use here. By the way, this is the free version of ChatGPT that uses GPT 3.5 model. OpenAI has already developed the next version, GPT-4. At this stage, that's still payable. So I'm using the free version here, and we can demonstrate a couple of the things I was saying. I can say something like, I will vacation in, yes?
Real quick, we had a couple comments saying that the token authentication is enabled. Do you have something that would fix that? I didn't have any problems getting into the binder, so I'm not sure if they just need a refresh, but a couple people have mentioned that there was a token.
Refresh.
Okay.
Yeah. How basically anything you may be getting here, either it's gonna just happily start up. There's different kinds of error Binder can unfortunately spit out here. Just make sure to refresh the Binder page until the notebook comes up. And of course, now it works for me seamlessly, and it's going to come up without the error that some of you are seeing, but it's not uncommon that you have an error there. So yes, just make sure to refresh. All right, good. So back to ChatGPT. I was going to show an example how it can answer questions. I have a question or a prompt. I will vacation in Slovenia in August, for example. What should I go see? And it will, of course, give me some recommendations. It's able to understand what I'm asking it and give me some reasonable outputs. I put this in, I'm actually from Slovenia, so then I can tell whether the output that it is going to give me makes some sense or not. It's sometimes faster than other times. It's a little bit slow right now. I'm not sure if that's just my connection or if it's just being slow. Sometimes it is. I'm going to blame my connection here, though, but it should come up with some suggestions, hopefully. As I said, if you've used this before, you probably know that this usually works much faster. So it communicates like a person is going to give me some recommendations of what I could do in Slovenia. As I mentioned, I could also translate. I could put in, I would like to translate to German, for example, a word from English. It is going to happily do that. Given that it's acting up a little bit slowly right now, I'm just going to stop it. This would usually spit up quite a few recommendations that are pretty reasonable. It started with visiting the capital, which makes sense. As I said, I could ask to translate to German. I want to book a table for 4. You can misspell things, right? I misspelled translate, and most of the time it actually understands what I mean and indeed gives me the right translation. It could summarize things for me. I have an article here that I may be interested in, but I don't have time to read it. I can copy paste that URL and I can ask it to summarize in 3 sentences this particular article. And it's going to read that and then give me a short summary. As I said, it can also generate code. So I can give it a prompt. I'll just copy the one I actually have here so it's faster. I can ask it to write some Python code. In this particular example, something very simple. I'm asking it to write a function that takes 2 lists as input and returns the one with more elements. A very simple prompt, and it indeed, there we go. That's what it generated. Not the most elegant code. Maybe I would have written that better, but still, it's able to do that. Or maybe you're curious whether it can do some machine learning. Can I tell it something like this? I have some data set X, label vector Y. Can you use the scikit-learn, Python's library for machine learning, to scale this data and train a random forest classifier, for example? And indeed, it will generate this code. I can kind of iteratively improve my prompts such that I get back what I actually want. In this case, for anyone familiar with scikit-learn, it's not using pipelines. I may want it to use pipelines. I could include that in my prompt and say, please use a pipeline, and it can do that. So this maybe is an example of kind of very simple code, and it can definitely do that. As the problem that you wanted maybe to code up for you becomes more specific or harder, it also becomes harder to construct a good prompt. Yeah, you need to sometimes then guide it step by step. And also do expect, if you ask it to write more complex code, you probably, if you get back useful code, you will need to revise it and fix it before it can actually be useful. All right, so this is just sort of some of the examples of what you can do with ChatGPT. For the purpose of today's demo, we are actually going to use it on yet another task, which is the following natural language processing text. I want to process a bunch of text that lives in this folder called data. It actually contains some text files. In my case, it's actually just 4 text files, but imagine this could be 50,000. And each of them contains information about a gift agreement. So basically between 2 people where we have a donor, name, address, email, and then we have a recipient, then we have a description of what was given and some other clauses of this particular agreement. And imagine that here I have many of such agreements, and perhaps I want to extract from each of them the names of the people, so the name of the donor, the name of the recipient, and what exactly was gifted. The pattern or the format of each of these agreements could be similar, could be quite different. The task that a human could do, can ChatGPT do it? Of course it can, as you can imagine. That's why I'm giving this example. If I were to copy paste, for example, this particular agreement and plug it into ChatGPT, and maybe let's start a new chat here, and I can tell it to extract just donor name, recipient name, and exactly what was gifted in this agreement. And now I'm going to copy paste right here the entire agreement. And if I give it that, it's going to be able to extract for me who was the donor, who was the recipient, and just what was the gift part. So I could do this myself. I would have to write some painful Python code. Maybe I could use a regular expression. If the contracts or the gift agreements are not following a standard pattern, big nightmare. So it's a perfect tool for something like this. But now imagine that I had many agreements. I have thousands of them. I want to do that for each of them. And while some of them maybe, again, follow similar pattern, some of them maybe don't. Instead of me copy pasting every agreement into this web interface, I would, of course, instead like to use this programmatically. I would like to use a web API, and one exists, and I can, of course, do this and then integrate this with the rest of my potential Python code I may have. And that's what we are going to do next. Before we do that, I do want to mention just a little bit about how does ChatGPT do what it does. Yeah, so in this particular example, it was able to extract what I asked it to do. It was also able to give me vacation recommendations. It's able to translate from one language to the other. How does it do that? So this is not the focus of the demo, so I'm going to be very brief here, but I do want to highlight just a couple of things that are important to know. ChatGPT falls under the family of what are called deep learning architectures that are transformers. This concept comes from this now famous paper, Attention is All You Need, from 2017. I find it mind-blowing that this was only 5 years ago. But basically, it is an architecture of neural networks that lends itself to natural language processing tasks. And in principle, all that ChatGPT is doing is it's able to predict the probability of the next word, meaning, I should put it differently, what's the most likely next word? What next word would make most sense, if you will? So as I give it a sequence, either a question or some prompt, it views this as a sequence to be completed. And the model predicts the probabilities for all the words in the vocabulary. What's the probability that the next word would be the? What's the probability that the next word would be summer? And then it picked the most probable word that should follow the sequence I gave it, and it gives me that. That then is basically part of the sequence that it uses to predict the next word and the next word. So it's just kind of based on a huge amount of data from the World Wide Web that it was trained on. It has essentially, through that, learned grammar, some sort of reasoning even, learned some facts, but all it's doing is based on a bunch of that data that it's seen, based bunch of human text, how to predict the next word. Now, why is that model so much better than what we've seen in the neural network models that came before it? Just want to highlight two things here. One is transformer models have this very long attention span. In ChatGPT, it's able to have a long conversation and refer to things that potentially are way back in the conversation. So it's able to basically keep that attention and focus on different parts of potentially very long conversation. And the other very important thing is a concept of self-attention. In transformer models like ChatGPT, every word in the sequence is represented, and it's represented, or its meaning in a way, is derived from the words around it. And that's very powerful because that means that, for example, if I had two sentences, my Python turned 2 years old today. So you're referring to my snake pet, or Python is my favorite language, Python the language. Those are the same word, Python, but because of the words around it, due to the self-attention mechanism in transformers, these two words will be represented differently, even though it's the same word. And that kind of is key in unlocking this deeper understanding that transformers with ChatGPT is able to do. Architecture looks something like this. There's an input sequence that we give it in, so our sentence, that goes through an encoder that essentially captures the meaning of what we put in. That is then passed into the decoder that comes up with, so what's the most probable next word? that then becomes part of also the sequence, right? So my input together with the other words that it has generated so far, all of that becomes input to predict the next word, and so forth. So in that way, just by predicting the next word, being trained on a bunch of text that it has seen in training, it's able to do what it does. Good. So enough about what's under the hood. This could be a separate webinar. How do large language models work? How do transformers work? We want to instead focus today on the API. So this means on using ChatGPT's capabilities programmatically in Python specifically. And what that means is that, right, I don't want to use this web interface necessarily. I want to write some code that's going to ask GPT for an output, and GPT will give me the completion. So I should mention a couple of things here. We are going to encounter a couple concepts as we do this that are general to using any API. So when you are consuming a web API with HTTP, it essentially means that I, in this case, my computer is has the role of a client, and I am essentially making HTTP requests to the server hosting my API. In this case, it's going to be OpenAI. Is the server I'm pinging. In the request, I sent some information about what do I want to get? What am I interested in? What out of this API do I want? In the response, the server gives me back whatever I asked for, hopefully. How I write this request in this HTTP request programmatically in Python, you have several options here. So to mention just two, we could use a generic HTTP requests library. In Python, that library is called requests, and I can write my requests, ping that API, get back the response. We also have, in this specific case of the API that we're using with ChatGPT, an OpenAI library. OpenAI developed their own library, Python library, that essentially is just going to abstract away quite a bit of the nitty-gritty things that we would otherwise have to do ourselves if we used the requests library directly. So instead, we are going to use the OpenAI library. And what that means is that you do need to have that set up. So you can find also the link here to the GitHub repo of this library. So there's a bit explained about kind of how you can, okay. Okay, that's better. So you can see the code, it tells you how to install it and all of that. So once you have that installed, we can use it. But we do need to make sure, though, that before we can use the API, we need to have an API key set up. So if you do not have yours yet, once you have an account with OpenAI, you would need to go to the website linked here. That would look something like this, especially if you have never generated an API key with OpenAI before. It would look something like this, and you would need to click on this Create New Secret Key button. And what that would allow you to do is to create your own API key. Keep it safe. Do not share it with anyone. It's basically just a string of characters. What you want to do is you want to copy it from there and keep it safe. Don't share it with anyone. That particular API key, we're going to need it when we then write code that makes a request to the OpenAI API. So what we suggest here is what's sort of one of the good practices of dealing with secrets like that, like credentials and API keys, and that is to use what are called environment variables. So we created here this ChatGPT template.env file. So my suggestion would be that you copy that string of characters you get as your OpenAI API key, and you want to paste it in an .env file that should look something like this. It should say OpenAI API key equals, you copy paste your string right there. That's what I also did with mine. And then make sure to save this in a file called chatgpt.env. So that's the one I have right here. That one includes my secret. That one includes my API key. And now that I have that in that file, what we can then do is have some Python code that's going to load that. So .env is a library in Python that allows you to load an environmental variable, and then I pull it with OS from there, and I'm just loading that as an API key that I will be using with OpenAI. So this part here, if you haven't done this, then you do need to do this first. So only after you have done this will you be able to run the rest of the cells in this notebook as well. So after we have done this, we would now have this API key set, and that means that we are ready to make some requests. I do want to see what's happening here. Yeah, good. Okay, it completed. For some reason, this is all very slow right now, but fast enough so far. Hopefully it cooperates, continues to cooperate. By the way, if you are using your account and you have not used any billing options in your OpenAI account, you are using the free trial. A free trial comes with some amount of free credits. Every time we will make a request, it will cost us a bit. You can follow this link right here that will show you the usage. So basically how many credits you still have. You are given $5 that you get to spend. Beyond that, you'll then have to start paying for it. So here you can see your usage, you can see how much you still have left. So do keep that in mind. All right, we are ready to start using the API. We have our API key set, and what you want to do next, no matter what API you are using, is check out the documentation. I am going to here go to whatever this links to, which is the documentation of OpenAI's API. This website tends to still change a bit. So notice that if you look at this in 2 months, it may start to look a little bit different. This is all still very much under development. New things are coming up all the time. But if you go under documentation, at least at this time under this tab, and then under GPT, you can find some documentation. In there, there's also a link to even more documentation if you go follow this one. One thing I want to highlight here that's important is in ChatGPT's API, there are basically 2 modes or 2 APIs. One is Chat Completions API, and the other one is Completions API. The difference between the two is that Completions API allows you to essentially, and here's some sample code that we're going to use as well. Completions API allows you to give ChatGPT a single prompt, and it's going to give you a single completion, so a single output that it comes up with. Chat Completions API, on the other hand, allows you to use it for these multi sort of message exchanges. So something that's more like a chat, where you say something, then the chatbot says something else, then you say something back, then ChatGPT says something else, and then you can ask it, so what are you going to say next? In this case, this means that what we pass in as messages has to be a whole history of the whole chat. But Chat Completions API essentially allows us to do everything that Chat Completions API does and more. Because a chat can be very short, it can be a single prompt with a single returned message. So that's one thing. The other is that the Chat Completions API at the moment supports the most cost-effective model and the most advanced models that OpenAI has developed. So if you use completions, you don't have those models at your disposal. So for those reasons, we're going to use Chat Completions API. There actually is a discussion here on that. If you see this tab here, Chat Completions versus Completions, it talks about exactly what I was just saying and recommends to use this one. So we are going to use this. So that means that if I were to copy this, we are now ready to create our first kind of API request and get back a response. And we'll start with, let's say, a simple prompt. How much is 2 + 2? So I'm copying here from what was in the documentation. Our response will be whatever OpenAI Chat Completion Create gives us. we will be using this model that as it was suggested. And under messages, I'll actually delete this because we're going to have our own, what we want to put in. Under my messages, I'm going to pass in, it has to be a list of dictionaries where, because I'm using it as just not a chat, but just I'm giving it a prompt, I want an output. I can say role, that is the user, that is means that's me. And what is the content of what the user is saying? Content. What the user is saying is, well, let's pass in this simple prompt, meaning I'm asking it how much is 2 + 2. So if I pass this and we run this, and actually, let me add one more thing. There's many other input parameters that you can specify here. So model specified which model we're using. Messages is, you'll see more on what extra things we can add there. There's another one that I'm going to specify, which is called temperature. Temperature is something that you can set to either 0 or something more. And it controls the degree of randomness of the output that ChatGPT is going to give you. If you set it to 0, the outputs or the responses you get back are going to be somewhat reproducible. Not always, it will still have a little bit of randomness there, but it's at the minimum. If you instead wanted to come up with maybe slightly different things every time, you could make this a 1 or more. So I'll set it to 0. Let's run this. So after we do this, we have sent sort of a query, and we got back a response. And let's look at what that response is. So if I take this, make a new cell, and let's see what the response looks like. Response I can tell. Let's just use tab completion. Except that it's not cooperating. There we go. Response. And you can see that there's quite a bit that it returns. But what we wanted is buried in the choices under message, under content. That's where its completion is. So if I go under choices, we're closer. It's a list. I have to index into the 0th element. Then under message, under content, it's buried a bit, but we can get there. It's my answer. Yeah, and that's exactly what we have here as well. If I wanted it to give me just a response, so without the whole thing, I can ask it to do that here. I can say, just give me the answer. And this is the part where you may have to iteratively change your prompt so that you get just the output that you want. One other thing I want to mention is that Chat Completion API allows you to specify more than just a single prompt and get a single output. This messages list can contain more. Here is an example where we also use another dictionary in this list, and that one is with role system. So not with role user, that's me given in some prompt, but role system that allows me to, under content via this string here, basically set up the behavior of the ChatGPT. So its demeanor, the context in which it should operate. I can say, be polite, be funny, as I'm saying here, or maybe speak like you are a 90-year-old person, or whatever you may want it to be. Give it instructions of how you want it to communicate. So if we run this and run this with that same prompt that was asking it what is 2 + 2, and I asked it to be funny, it says, well, if you're asking me, then the answer is 4, but if you're asking my cat, he'll probably say meow and walk away. So not that funny, but what it's trying, and on it's interesting that it has learned that there's something funny. It's trying to be funny. To be fair, probably if we ask some random person who's not a comedian or somebody with a great sense of humor to be funny while answering how much is 2 + 2, they would probably not come up with something much better than that. So I think it's doing quite well. Maybe not super funny though. It's hard to be funny. One more thing with chat completion, we can, as I said, use it for an actual chat. But then that means that under messages, so what we were passing in here, we have to pass in the whole history of the chat. And that means that, for example, so this part is the same as everything you've seen before, but under messages, we are going to pass in a list of dictionaries where I have a user that said this. then assistant here. So you've seen now role can be either user, can be system, or it can be assistant. User is me, the user. This is ChatGPT. So this is basically the conversation. I said, hi, who's the first US president? Then ChatGPT says the first US president is George Washington. Then I say, when was he born and how about the second? And you'll see that the output will tell me when George Washington was born, as well as refer to the second US president. So it understands to refer back in the chat, as you at this point probably expect it to. If I wanted to continue this conversation and use this as a chatbot in my application, I would have to append its output now to my messages list under the role assistant and give it a new prompt from the user, right? So I always have to pass in the whole list of all the previous messages. Good. That's basically it in terms of the backbone of how the OpenAI API works to make prompts to ChatGPT, and it's going to give you responses. So we are ready to do that now on our gift agreements task. Remember that we have these gift agreements. I would like to process this text and I want to give it me the donor name, recipient name, and what exactly was gifted. So first thing I'm actually going to do is I am going to create a function that is going to kind of do what we have here. I want to make a simple function where I give it a prompt and it gives me runs this code right there for a given prompt. So something like, let me define a generate response given some prompt. I may give it, what do I want it to do? Well, basically, exactly what we just had up there. So I'm going to actually copy from, let's say, this one we had up here where we had just one prompt with just one output. So something like this. And that's part of my function. And then what I want to do, great. So I have my chat completion create. That's the model I'm using. What are my messages? That's my role, which is the user. What does it say? Well, it's giving us prompt, I should say here. That's the input. And I'm going to set it to temperature 0. I don't want any randomness here. What I wanted to return is this part, or the way we had it here. These are all the same. Great. So here's my function. Return that. So I haven't done anything new. I've basically just wrapped this all into a function where if I now use this on what is 2 plus 5, it should give me a 7. So the next thing I'm going to do is I also want a function that is going to take a text from a gift agreement and give me a prompt that I need, because not only do I have to pass to ChatGPT the gift agreement itself, but I need a prompt that says extract, like we did here, extract the donor and the recipient and do this like that. So I already have a function prepared here. For the sake of time, I'm going to copy it in here. You also probably already see this function in your notebooks. So it's just a function that, given the text of the contract, it passes that into the string that I'm going to then give to ChatGPT. But I'm also asking it to extract just the name of the donor, the recipient, and the exact gift from the contract. But I'm also asking it to give me back the information in this format of JSON. That means it's going to be really nicely formatted. It's not going to be just some text I get back, but I'm going to be able to have a nice dictionary that I get back. And I tell it that I want fields donor, recipient, and gift. I also tell it, if there's many gifts, give it to me in a list of strings. So this is something where it's a prompt that I tweaked a little bit in order for ultimately get what I wanted from this. And that's very common. You're going to have to tweak your prompts to get what you want from ChatGPT. But this means I have the 2 functions I need. That's basically all I'm going to need. I now want to just read from a given file, let's say the first gift agreement. I open it, read from that file, load that into contract text, and then I can call my generate prompt function on that. That is going to create this prompt for ChatGPT, and I'm passing that into the generate response function. That makes that request to the API, gives me back my response. because I asked it to give me back the response in form of a JSON, that's indeed what it does. You see this nice formatting. The donor is this, the recipient is that, and that's the gift as part of that contract. Because it's in this nice format that I asked it for, I can use JSON loads and create a Python dictionary out of it. And that's exactly what I wanted. Now it's nicely structured. I can use this in the rest of my application, for example. So that's great. All we're left to do is we now basically need to process every gift agreement. Remember again, let's imagine that I had 50,000 agreements here. 50,000 agreements here. So many, many files. What I want to do first is write some code that tells me just what are the names of all the files in this folder. And I can do that with the glob function, glob library, I should say. What it allows me to do is specify that, let's say in subfolder data, I'm looking for any file that ends with txt. And what that produces is a list of strings, which are the file names of the files in this folder. And now that I have that, now all I need to do is I have a function here that is going to take a given file name, and then it's going to open that file name. And then what it's going to do is as it opens the file name, it's going to call the ingredients or the text in that file contract text, same as we did before on a single agreement. I'm going to plug it into the generate prompt function that's going to say, extract from this agreement just the donor and the recipient and the gifts and give me a JSON and all of that we created above. Then we're passing that into the generate response. That's the one that makes the API request, and we get back the output. Same as we did here. Let's use it with JSON loads so that we actually get this nice dictionary out. And that's what this function returns. So all that's left to do is that I now need to call this function on every file name in files. And that's what we do here with this list comprehension, just saying for every file in my files, I'm calling this process agreement on that. So I'm going to get this process agreement list of dictionaries with all the data extracted that I wanted. And maybe you noticed while we're waiting for this to do it, I sneaked in a sleep here. Try to run this without doing that. You will see that you get an error if you are using the free version of this API. Many APIs are rate limited. The free version of OpenAI API is limited to 3 requests per minute for the particular model that we are using here. That means that I would get an error here because I'm trying to process more than that in this for loop. So here's a kind of a dirty way to get around this. I sneaked in a 15-second sleep time for every time the function is called. And in that way, I get around not calling it too often. This means that we end up with this processed agreements list of dictionaries. And again, imagine this could have been a much larger corpus of text that I am kind of processing here. So that much about ChatGPT. This was just one example task that we solved with this OpenAI API and using ChatGPT programmatically. You could easily follow this exact same approach for any other use cases, anything else you may be working on. Just modify these functions and, of course, the prompts such that you get the outputs that are useful for you. I should also say this was an example of a task where ChatGPT shines, where it's the right tool to use, where it will do a good job. And while everything I've said so far may seem like ChatGPT is just straightforwardly great, that is not the whole story. I am basically out of time or almost out of time, but I do want to mention there's a last section or a couple at the end here of this notebook. It is important to mention this tool has some first known practical limitations. So do check this out. One of the things you want to be aware of is that if you are using ChatGPT to generate text, well, you're always using it to generate text, but if you're using it to come up with new content, let's say, or using it to fact check something, ChatGPT is known to generate plausible sounding answers that are not correct. This is also called AI hallucinations. I encourage you to follow this link to read more about that. So that's just sort of one of the problems of this model. It's also limited in its knowledge of the world after 2021. That's the data up until which it was trained on. It's also known to have a bias problem, like any machine learning model. This is a tool. It is far from neutral. Yeah, it contains biases present in the data that it was trained on. And there's all sorts of data out on the internet that this was trained on. So big problems there as well. And the last one I want to highlight is security. This is an AI tool that has no safeguards in terms of privacy and security. Do not share personal information, sensitive information, or any confidential information in your prompts in ChatGPT. Good. And I should also say that we are only beginning to see what this AI can do, how it can be used, and how it can be misused. Many companies are already integrating this into their products and services. And I don't want to make it too grim, but I do invite you to check this out and look at some of these links so that you can sort of inform yourself. As Sam Altman, the OpenAI CEO, put it, and I quote him, "My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world. If this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong." So let's just all keep that in mind. Just to say that there will be constant vigilance needed as this tool and new ones like it are being used more and more. Use it responsibly. Let's all be informed participants doing our best to avoid any worst case scenarios that may happen. I'm going to leave you with the best practices list. If you are using this API, do keep your API key safe. Don't input any sensitive data. Kind of tweak your prompts iteratively so that you kind of break them down into smaller tasks for best results. Do have a human reviewer check this before you just go and use it. Go use the outputs. And also there's a link here to some best practices from AI themselves. So I'll wrap it up with this. Do use it for tasks that it's kind of good for, like the one that I just shown you. On the other hand, should you use it to say, get legal or medical advice? Probably not. So I'll stop there and I'll hand it over to Raven, who also has some additional information about our programs for you.
Thanks, Anna. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. I see that a lot of you have questions in the chat for Anna, so I will leave some time at the end so that she's able to answer those questions for you. But to get started, first I want to talk about fellows and scholars. So many of you have asked if we offer scholarships to any of our programs, and the answer is yes, we do. We admit two types of students into our data science and data engineering programs. Fellows are offered tuition-free scholarships to our full-time program. We offer a limited number of these scholarships to highly qualified candidates. Fellows are expected to leave any current employment to attend our programs and are expected to interview exclusively with our hiring partners. Scholars will pay tuition to participate in our program. They are not required to interview solely with our hiring partner network and may maintain their current employment. Scholars still have access to the same curriculum, resources, and tools as our fellow students. Full tuition scholarships are not offered on a part-time basis. So next we'll talk about our scholarships. We will be continuing to offer our Women of Excellence in STEM Scholarship and our Equity and Diversity in Data Scholarship in fall 2023. These scholarships aim to help remove barriers and provide opportunities for women, veterans, LGBTQIA+, and students from racial and ethnic backgrounds that are traditionally underrepresented in technical roles. Each scholarship will award $3,000 to a student who fits the diversity criteria as we work towards a more equitable future in the STEM field. Our scholarship applications are open now, so please visit our website and you'll be able to click on the scholarship tabs to apply for that scholarship if you're interested. So next we'll get into our placement rates. A big component of our program that we really pride ourselves in is helping our students not only grasp data science concepts, but also helping them get placed in that field. For our data science fellowship program, 97% of our students that go through our program are currently employed outside of academia, and 88% are employed within 6 months of completing the program. That's part of the challenge, not only learning content, but being able to transition into a data science or engineering role. That's really where our program stands out because we help you do both. Where are our graduates working and what are they doing? So our graduates are working in 55 different industries. Some of the most common industries we see are computer software, internet, IT, financial services, and biotech. Some of the typical job titles that we see are data scientist, data analyst, research scientist, software developer, and product manager. These titles and roles vary depending on the company and industry, but these are some of the roles we've placed in the past. Many, if not most, of our current hiring partners are looking for data engineers. We've seen the demand for this role has grown 40% year over year. We've also seen our graduates earning 24% more than the industry standard, with starting base salaries up upwards of $125,000, which is very exciting to see. So this slide is just going to show you a short list of our data science fellowship hiring partners. As I mentioned earlier, many of our companies are also hiring for data engineering roles as well. You've also asked if we have financial aid options, and the answer is yes. In addition to our scholarships, we have partnered with Leaf to provide an income sharing agreement. It's great. You can participate in our program with just a deposit down, and you won't be required to make any payment until you graduated and are working and earning more than $40,000 annually. We also have 2 additional finance options available through Leaf. One is the tuition plan. It's a tuition installment plan and a contingent payment plan. For the tuition installment plan, it allows you to make fixed monthly payments over 12 months. And for the contingent payment plan, you can participate in the program just like our income sharing agreement, just your deposit down. You won't be required to make any payment until you graduated. And for this plan, is once you're earning more than $50,000 annually. After that, you will make fixed monthly payments over 24 months. We also provide loans through Ascent, and Ascent offers 3 different options. So you'll have a deferred repayment option, an interest-only repayment options, and an immediate repayment options. Lastly, we found that many companies are willing to sponsor or pay for their employees to go through our program. It's a win-win. You get to get great stuff in the evening and be able to apply it to your job during the day. If this is something that you think your company would be interested in or you would like to present to them, we do have a letter that we can provide you that will help you lay out the program and all the benefits of attending. So where are we right now? Well, we run multiple cohorts a year, and our summer cohort is starting next week, but the application for our fall cohort is open now. So for the fall full-time cohort, it's going to begin September 25th and end November 17th. For our part-time cohort, it's going to begin September 25th as well, but end February 24th. Our early application deadline is June 30th, and our challenge deadline is July 3rd. The full-time cohorts are 8 weeks long, and our part-time cohorts are 20 weeks long. We ask that you submit your application by June 30th for the early admissions deadline. You'll then have 72 hours to complete your coding challenge if you're interested in one of our fellow spots. And the challenge deadline, like I said, is July 3rd. You cannot complete the challenge unless you submit the application. Just in general, I recommend you complete the application and challenge sooner than later to avoid any technical issues. We are unable to reopen the application or challenge after the deadline. One thing to know is our coding challenge is now optional. You will only need to complete the challenge if you wish to be considered for one of our limited full tuition scholarships. If you wish to be considered for admissions as a scholar or for one of our partial scholarships, you will only need to complete the application, upload your resume, and attend an admissions interview. And that's it for early admissions. We also offer regular admissions after our early admission cycle. The difference is we evaluate applicants on a first come, first served basis. So if you want to have a better chance of getting a fellow spot, being selected for a scholarship, or just knowing earlier if you've been accepted into the program to secure financing, I absolutely recommend applying for our early admission cycle. So we do have 5 minutes left before we have to end this presentation. I do want to make sure we get to all of your questions in the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and open the floor for any questions. If you haven't placed your question in the Q&A box, you can do so now.
Thank you, Raven.
On a start.
Yes, I'm looking at the answers. I've been typing some of the answer. Looking at the questions, I'm typing some of the answers. I'll go from the start, and I think that means at the top. Andrew's asking if ChatGPT actually reads the article that you wanted to summarize, or does it hallucinate the description based on the URL? Yeah, very funny. I hope it actually reads it. I believe it actually reads it. So I think it's going to take the entire article as the sequence that it needs to complete. That means that together with my prompt to summarize it, it comes up with the next words that come up with the summarization in let's say 3 sentences. I see Zengiz asking about Azure OpenAI. So Azure OpenAI is, how confusing, yet another AI API interface to interact with ChatGPT programmatically, but you can think of it as basically a separate API. It came from this marriage of Microsoft and OpenAI. And I don't know of the way to automatically convert this API calls to the Azure OpenAI. So I would say, no, you might have to do that separately and check the documentation of Azure OpenAI separately. So it's a slightly separate thing. There's also a question about what if the text files we're processing or putting in have offensive or bad words, or maybe the question refers to what if it was trained on contains those offensive bad words. ChatGPT is not going to be bothered by that necessarily. There are, as OpenAI is promising, some safeguards in there where it may try to say something if you start to scream at it and use bad words, it may respond as in kind of nicely. So it will recognize that something is offensive, but there's nothing baked in necessarily that would at this stage make it not process your text files if they used offensive words or something like that. There's also a question of whether it can only give us JSON files or other types of outputs as well. So here I would invite you to basically play around with it and see what it can do. This also keeps changing all the time as the model gets better. I imagine it could be able to do much more as well, but certainly already it can do much more than just JSON files. Yeah. Also a question of if I have many gift agreements and every API call costs me money, would I want to send the entire file as a prompt, or it's better to coast it into writing some regex code that will handle the job? I would say either. So here I could ask it to give me a regex, and ChatGPT is known to be good at that. It can give me good regex, so I don't have to write it myself. So up to you. That depends on the problem. If the gift agreements in this case looked such that a regex would be a good tool, I would probably go for that. Just have a simple call, one single call, give me the regex. But on the other hand, if they don't follow a pattern that could even be solved by regex, but it requires some deeper understanding of what's in the gift contracts, then maybe it's better to use it like we did. And then also there's a question from Eugen about how much this costs us. And if I have, let's say, a huge corpus of text that I want to have, let's say, sentiment on user reviews, what's the best way to approach this in terms of costs? You are going to eventually have to pay. I have not played around with it that much with how much things cost, because I try to avoid having to give OpenAI more money. And I also haven't had use cases where I've had to pay for it. So I'm not entirely sure. You would have to check that in also their pricing policies, how they charge it. So then you would see, is it better to give many small inputs or a few large ones. And there's a question about the difference between directly using ChatGPT in the web or the library. We should get the same, we should get the same responses, except that ChatGPT doesn't actually give the same responses, even if you use the web API version with the same prompts multiple times. So to that degree, it's basically gonna be the same. The only thing that's different is that when I'm using the OpenAI API, I can also specify what model I'm using, and there I may be using kind of different models than the one that's running on the web. Can you give it a PDF to summarize? How would you do that? Yeah, you have to either in code, you would just have code that can open a PDF and have that text and sent via the API. You could do that. There's a question, is it trustable? Oof, that's a long discussion. We should have a separate webinar on problems with ChatGPT and is it trustable. So I'm going to say no here for certain applications and yes for certain ones. So like the one we just showed here, I think that's where you can trust it. but otherwise, yeah, if you're asking it for some facts or things where it can start to hallucinate or things like that, then I wouldn't always trust it. I'm happy to keep answering questions. I do see that we're over time, but I think, I don't know if I should stop. I think maybe just the one more that I see there that I saw before I looked at the time. Is it able to create and deliver large data sets of social network data use? So I'm not sure what you mean by create and deliver large data sets. It can certainly create many things that you ask it to do. So in one of the things that you can pass in the API call is also the max tokens, which is so kind of the maximum number of words it can give you back. So that can be a very large. I'm not sure exactly if that answers your question. I'll stop there, Raven. I'm stopping. We're out of time.
No problem. I'm so happy we have so many questions right now. Unfortunately, the webinar is over. I do want to answer this one question about attending outside of the United States, and we do have students who attend from all over. Our program is online, so you're more than welcome to apply if you're located outside of the United States. If you have any other questions that we were unable to get to, or if it was just like a private question that you didn't want to ask in front of everyone, feel free to email us at admissions@thedataincubator.com, and we'll be sure to get your questions answered. I am looking forward to seeing all of you. And if you have any questions about the admissions process, also reach out to me. We are going to go ahead and end our presentation now, and a recording will be sent out to all of those registered for the webinar. So you all have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.